The November rain in Seattle felt just as freezing as my mother's glare when she pointed me toward the service entrance. She said my worn dress would ruin my sister Lara's perfect aesthetic. So I huddled under a leaking roof while they toasted the thief inside. They had no idea that the man driving the beat-up truck toward the gate actually owned the empire the groom was desperate to join. In 5 minutes, their champagne would taste bitterer than poison. My name is Celia Montrose, and at 32 years old, I had mastered the art of becoming invisible. But evidently, not invisible enough for my mother. The gravel of the driveway crunched beneath the tires of the rental sedan I had parked a quarter of a mile away to avoid embarrassment. I walked the rest of the distance to the Golden Oak estate, clutching my purse against my side to shield it from the mist that was beginning to roll in off the Puget Sound. This venue was the crown jewel of wedding locations in the Pacific Northwest, a sprawling architectural marvel of faux Tudor timber and stone that cost more to rent for one evening than most people earned in a year. As a landscape architect, I could appreciate the irony of the perfectly manicured hedges. They were non-native boxwoods, forced into unnatural geometric shapes to please the eye, suffocating the soil beneath them. It felt like a metaphor for my entire existence within the Montrose family. I reached the grand double doors of the estate, taking a deep breath to steady the trembling in my hands. I was not wearing a designer gown. My dress was a simple, structured piece in a muted sage green, bought off the rack at a department store during a clearance sale. It was clean, it was pressed, and it fit me well. But it lacked the ostentatious shimmer of sequins or the arrogance of a brand label stitched into the neckline. I had told myself it was elegant. I had told myself it was enough. I was wrong. Before my hand could even touch the brass handle of the entrance, the door swung open. It was not a doorman who greeted me, but Eleanor, my mother. She stood there like a sentinel guarding the gates of heaven, clad in a floor-length gown of silver silk that shimmered like liquid mercury. Her hair was an intricate sculpture of blonde waves, sprayed into a helmet of perfection that no wind could disturb. She looked beautiful, in the way a glacier is beautiful, cold, distant, and capable of crushing you without a sound. "Celia," she said. It was not a greeting. It was an accusation. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over me from my wind-blown hair down to my sensible nude heels. The look lasted less than 3 seconds, but it flayed me alive. It was the same look she used to give my report cards when I brought home an A- instead of an A+. The same look she gave my dirt-stained fingernails after I had spent an afternoon in the garden. It was a look of profound, exhausted disappointment. "Mother," I replied, forcing a smile that felt brittle on my face. "You look stunning. Is the ceremony starting soon? I didn't want to be late." Eleanor did not smile back. She took a half-step forward, effectively blocking the gap between the heavy oak doors, ensuring I could not slip past her into the warmth of the foyer. Behind her, I could hear the murmur of voices, the clinking of crystal, and the soft, sophisticated strains of a live string quartet playing a waltz. The air smelling of expensive perfume and roasting prime rib wafted out, teasing me. "You cannot go in there, Celia," she stated, her voice low and devoid of emotion. I blinked, confused. "What? Why? I am the sister of the bride." "Exactly," Eleanor snapped, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You are the sister of the bride. And look at you. You look like you just walked off the street. We have senators in there. Celia, we have the vice president of operations from Pierce's company. We have people who matter." "I matter," I whispered, though the conviction was draining out of me with every second. "I am family." "You are an eyesore," she corrected me, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle on her silver bodice. "Lara is trying to build a future. Pierce is trying to secure a promotion. This wedding is not just a party. It is a networking event, a presentation of our family's status. And you." She gestured vaguely at my sage green dress, with a hand adorned with a diamond ring large enough to choke a bird. "You do not fit the aesthetic. You look like the help, and a poor version of it at that. I will not have you ruining the symmetry of the head table or the background of the official photographs. The cruelty was so casual, so practiced, that it took a moment for the pain to actually hit. It wasn't a sharp stab. It was a dull, heavy ache that settled in the center of my chest. "So what do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Go home? And cause a scene by leaving?" "Absolutely not," Eleanor hissed. She glanced over my shoulder, checking to make sure no important guests were witnessing this interaction. "Go around the side. There is a patio off the kitchen service area. The staff takes their breaks there. You can sit there until the ceremony is over and the dinner service begins, maybe later, when everyone is drunk and the lights are dimmed. You can slip into the back of the room, but for now, stay out of sight." "It's raining, Mother," I said, pointing to the gray sky that was finally letting go of its burden. The first heavy drops were already splashing against the pavement. "Then sit under the awning," she dismissed, already turning her back on me. "Do not come through these doors. Celia, do not embarrass us." The heavy oak doors slammed shut in my face. The sound was final, echoing like a gunshot in the quiet driveway. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the wood grain, waiting for the tears to come, but I was too shocked to cry. I was 32 years old, a professional woman, a wife, and I had just been banished to the service entrance of my own sister's wedding like a disobedient dog. I turned and walked. I followed the path she had indicated, a narrow walkway lined with garbage bins that led to the side of the estate. The rain began to fall in earnest now, a cold, relentless November downpour that defines Seattle. It wasn't a romantic mist. It was icy water that soaked through fabric in seconds. The patio, Eleanor had mentioned, was nothing more than a concrete slab covered by a rotting wooden pergola that had seen better days. It was cluttered with stacks of plastic chairs, empty crates, and an oversized ashtray overflowing with soggy cigarette butts. This was where the caterers came to complain about the guests. Where the dishwashers came to gasp for air, I found a white plastic garden chair that wasn't completely covered in grime and dragged it under the one patch of the pergola that seemed to have a functional roof. It was a small corner, barely 3 feet wide. I sat down, wrapping my arms around myself as the temperature dropped. The wind picked up, whipping the rain sideways, spraying my legs and the hem of my dress. From my vantage point, I was looking directly into the main ballroom through a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass windows. I was on the outside, in the cold and the dark, looking into a fishbowl of golden light and warmth. I could see them all. There was my father, Richard, holding a glass of scotch, laughing heartily at a joke I couldn't hear. He looked proud. He looked like the patriarch of a successful, loving family. He had no idea, or perhaps he didn't care, that his youngest daughter was shivering 10 feet away from him, separated by a pane of glass and a lifetime of neglect. And then, I saw her, Lara. My sister was standing in the center of the room, basking in the adoration of the crowd. She was wearing a custom-made gown that I knew for a fact cost $15,000. It was a cloud of white lace and imported silk, fitted to perfection, with a train that spilled out behind her like a royal decree. She threw her head back, laughing, the diamonds at her throat catching the light of the chandeliers. She looked radiant. She looked angelic. A bitter bile rose in my throat. $15,000. The number echoed in my head, mocking me. My hand instinctively went to the empty pocket of my dress. 3 weeks ago, when Lara had called me hysterically screaming that the venue was going to cancel because they were short on the final deposit, I hadn't hesitated. I had looked at my beloved Honda Accord, the car I had driven since college, the car that had carried me to every job site and every landscape survey. It was reliable. It was mine. I sold it the next day. I sold it for $4,000 cash to a teenager in the neighborhood. And then I drained my personal savings account, the money I had been squirreling away to start my own restoration firm. To make up the difference, I had wired $10,000 to the wedding planner anonymously, under the guise of a distant relative or a fan of Pierce's work. just so Lara wouldn't have the satisfaction of knowing she owed me anything. I knew if I gave it to her directly, she would have sneered at it, or worse, accused me of trying to buy her affection, so I had walked everywhere for 3 weeks. I had taken the bus in the rain to meet clients. I had sacrificed my mobility and my security so that she could spin around in that $15,000 dress and drink champagne. And this was my thank you: a plastic chair in the rain. A shiver racked my body, violent and uncontrollable. My teeth began to chatter. The dampness was seeping into my bones. I felt small. I felt incredibly, devastatingly stupid. The side door opened with a creak, startling me. I flinched, expecting Eleanor to come out and scold me for breathing too loudly. Instead, a young man in a waiter's uniform stepped out. He looked to be about 20 years old, with tired eyes and a stain on his apron. He held a tray of dirty champagne flutes in one hand. He stopped when he saw me, his eyes widening in surprise. He looked at my dress, which was now damp and clinging to my skin. He looked at the main window where the party was raging. Then he looked back at me. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't ask why I was there. In the hierarchy of this estate, at this moment, we were equals. In fact, he might have ranked higher. At least he was allowed inside. He set the tray down on a stack of crates and reached into his apron pocket. He pulled out a clean white linen napkin, the heavy, expensive kind with the golden oak logo embroidered on the corner. "Here," he said softly, extending it to me. "It's clean. You're shivering." I took the napkin, my fingers brushing his warm hand. "Thank you," I whispered. The kindness of a stranger hurt more than the cruelty of my mother. It cracked the dam I was trying so hard to hold up. "You want me to sneak you a drink?" he asked, glancing back at the door. "Or some bread rolls? The prime rib won't be out for another 40 minutes. "No," I said, wiping the rain from my cheek, unable to distinguish it from the tears that had finally started to fall. "No, thank you. I'm just waiting for someone." He nodded, understanding that I needed dignity more than I needed food. "Hang in there, miss," he said, before picking up his tray and disappearing back into the warmth. I was alone again. The jazz music swelled, a saxophone solo that sounded mournful even through the glass. I watched Pierce, the groom, enter the frame. He wrapped his arm around Lara's waist, whispering something in her ear that made her giggle. He looked smug. He looked like a man who had won a prize he didn't pay for. I couldn't watch anymore. The cold was becoming unbearable. My toes were numb inside my shoes. I felt a sudden, sharp panic. The fear that I really was worth nothing. That this was all I deserved. I fumbled for my phone in my purse with shaking hands. The screen was the only source of light in my dark corner. I pulled up the contact named Declan and typed, my thumbs slipping on the wet screen. "Are you here yet? I can't take this anymore." I hit send and stared at the screen, watching the little circle spin, praying for the message to deliver, praying for salvation to arrive in a beat-up pickup truck, to understand why I was sitting on a plastic chair in the freezing rain while my sister drank vintage champagne. You have to understand that this was not an isolated incident. It was simply the physical manifestation of a dynamic that had existed since the day Lara was born. In the theater of the Montrose family, Lara was the leading lady, the star standing in the spotlight, demanding applause for simply existing. I was the stagehand, dressed in black, scurrying in the shadows to make sure the props were in place and the trapdoors were oiled, unseen and unthanked. We were sisters by blood, but strangers by design. My profession was a constant source of embarrassment for my mother. I was a landscape architect specializing in the restoration of historic grounds. I spent my days kneeling in the dirt, coaxing life back into Victorian gardens that had been neglected for decades, or studying soil composition to save 100-year-old oak trees from rot. I saw beauty and resilience in the way a root could crack concrete to find the sun, to Eleanor and Richard Montrose. However, I was nothing more than a glorified gardener. I remember a dinner party 3 years ago when a family friend asked what I did for a living. Before I could open my mouth, my mother laughed. A tinkling, dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. She told them I was going through a bohemian phase and enjoyed playing in the mud. She made my master's degree from Cornell sound like a finger-painting workshop. I had wanted to scream that I was currently consulting on a preservation project for the city worth $2 million. But I bit my tongue. I always bit my tongue. That silence was the price of admission to this family. And then there was Declan. If I was the disappointment, Declan was the disgrace. We met 5 years ago at a salvage yard. I was looking for reclaimed limestone for a fountain. He was looking for a specific type of brass hinge for an intricate cabinet he was rebuilding. He was wearing a flannel shirt covered in sawdust and jeans that had clearly seen better days. His hands were rough, calloused, and permanently stained with walnut stain and oil. I fell in love with his hands first. They were hands that created, that fixed, that held things with a gentleness that belied their strength. But to my parents, Declan was a nightmare. He was a laborer, a blue-collar nobody. They looked at his sawdust-covered boots and saw failure. They never bothered to look at his eyes, which held an intelligence that far stripped anyone in their country club circle, the lowest point. The memory that still made my stomach turn with hot shame happened 2 Thanksgivings ago. We had been invited to my parents' house. It was a rare occurrence, as they usually preferred to spend the holidays with Lara and Pierce in whatever tropical resort was trending on Instagram that year. But that year, they were home, and they had just redecorated the living room. Declan and I arrived on time. Declan had come straight from his workshop. He had scrubbed his hands raw, but there was still a faint, lingering scent of linseed oil and cedar clinging to him. He was wearing his best button-down shirt, the one I had ironed for him that morning. We walked into the living room, where my father was holding court. The room was pristine, a temple to beige and cream. In the center sat a new, sprawling Italian leather sofa that my mother claimed cost $12,000. Declan moved to sit down, a polite smile on his face. "Stop!" My father's voice cracked through the air like a whip. Richard Montrose stood up, his face flushed with indignation. He pointed a trembling finger at Declan. "Do not sit there," my father commanded. "That is imported leather. I will not have you ruining it with your filth." The room went dead silent. Lara, who was lounging on the adjacent armchair, covered her mouth to hide a giggle. Pierce smirked, swirling his cognac. "Richard, please," I pleaded, my face burning. "Declan is clean. He showered before we came. The dust is in his pores." "Celia," my mother chimed in, not looking up from her magazine. "It gets everywhere. You know how hard it is to get wood oil out of leather. Perhaps Declan would be more comfortable in the kitchen. The stools there are metal. They are durable." I looked at my husband. I waited for him to explode. I waited for him to tell them to go to hell, to grab my hand and storm out. Any lesser man would have. But Declan just looked at my father with a calm, unreadable expression. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded, slow and deliberate. "Of course, Richard," Declan said, his voice even. "I wouldn't want to damage your investment. The kitchen is fine." He ate his turkey dinner alone at the kitchen island. While the rest of us sat in the dining room under the crystal chandelier, I wanted to join him. But Declan had caught my eye and given me a subtle shake of his head. "Don't fight?" His eyes had said, "Not today." What my parents didn't know, what nobody knew except for me, was that the man eating stuffing on a metal stool in the kitchen could have bought their entire house with the interest his portfolio earned in a single month. Declan Vance was not a carpenter. He was the founder and majority shareholder of Vanguard Zenith, one of the largest sustainable construction and development conglomerates on the West Coast. The cabinet making was his therapy, his meditation. He spent his days in boardrooms making decisions that shifted city skylines, and his weekends in his garage shop, working with wood because it kept him grounded. He hated the pretension of wealth. He hated the suits, the galas, the fake smiles, so he hid in plain sight. He loved the fact that my parents underestimated him. He called it his social filter. He said it showed him who people really were, and God. Did it show us who my family was? But the secrets didn't end with Declan. I had one of my own. Lara's job was another illusion. She was the vice president of marketing for a boutique design firm that specialized in green living spaces. She was the face of the brand, appearing in magazines, giving interviews about the intersection of nature and modern architecture. She won awards for her visionary concepts. The truth was that Lara couldn't draw a straight line with a ruler. She had zero spatial awareness and couldn't tell a fern from a ficus. Every single design, every blueprint, every groundbreaking concept she had presented in the last 4 years was mine. It started small. She had begged me to help her with a pitch when she was in danger of being fired. I did it because I couldn't stand to see her cry. Then it became a habit. She would come to my house with a bottle of wine and a sob story about a deadline, and I would spend 3 nights awake, drafting plans, rendering 3D models, and writing her speeches. She would take my work, put her name in the bottom right corner, and present it as her own. She got the promotions, the raises, the praise. I got a hangover and a text message that said, "Thanks, sis. You're a lifesaver." Why did I do it? Why did I let them treat Declan like a servant and me like a doormat? The answer lay in a promise I made to a dying woman. My grandmother, Rose, was the only person in the Montrose lineage who had a heart. She was the one who taught me how to plant a seed, how to wait for the bloom. When she was on her deathbed 5 years ago, cancer eating away at her frail body, she had gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Celia," she had whispered, her breath rattling in her chest, promise me you won't let this family break apart. Your mother is difficult, your sister is lost, but they are family. Be the water, my love. Water can flow around rocks. It can endure anything. Promise me you will keep the peace. If you leave, they will destroy each other." "I promise." "Grandma," I had sobbed. "I promise." That promise was a chain wrapped around my throat. It was the reason I stayed silent when Pierce mocked Declan's truck. It was the reason I ghost-wrote Lara's career. It was the reason I sat in the kitchen while my husband was treated like a leper. I was being the water. I was absorbing the blows to keep the structure from collapsing. But as I sat on that cold plastic chair outside the wedding venue, shivering in my damp dress, I began to realize something about water. Yes, it can flow. Yes, it can nourish. But water, when contained under enough pressure, can also cut through steel. I thought about Declan, my brilliant, patient, incredibly wealthy husband who was currently driving through the rain to rescue me. We had built a life that was a fortress against their shallowness. We called it stealth wealth. We lived in a modest-looking mid-century home that we had gutted and turned into a masterpiece of interior design, filled with priceless art that we never posted on social media. We took vacations to remote, exclusive locations where phones were banned. We had millions in the bank, but we drove old cars because we didn't need metal and glass to tell us who we were. My family thought we were losers because we didn't sparkle. They didn't understand that diamonds don't shine because they generate light. They shine because they reflect it, and my family was desperate for reflection. Inside the ballroom, the music shifted to something faster. Through the window, I saw Lara dancing. She was spinning, her arms thrown up in the air, oblivious to everything but her own reflection in the mirrors. She looked happy, but it was a fragile happiness, built on debt and lies. I checked my phone again. No reply from Declan yet. He was probably driving. I remembered the conversation Declan and I had the night before. After the disastrous rehearsal dinner where Pierce had humiliated him, Declan had been quiet on the drive home, his jaw set tight. "How much longer?" "Celia?" he had asked, his voice low in the darkness of the car. "How much longer are we going to play this game? I can buy that entire hotel. I can buy Pierce's company and fire him just for sport. Why do I have to sit there and let a man who leases a BMW tell me I'm a failure?" "Because of Grandma Rose," I had whispered, the old excuse tasting like ash in my mouth. "Rose is dead." "Celia," Declan had said, not unkindly. But we are alive, and I'm tired of watching them hurt you. I am tired of being the water." I hadn't answered him then. I was too afraid of the confrontation, too afraid of breaking the fragile peace I had spent my life maintaining. But now, with the cold rain seeping into my marrow and the sound of my sister's laughter ringing in my ears, the chain around my throat felt tighter than ever. The side door opened again. It wasn't the kind waiter this time. It was Lara. She stepped out into the covered patio, a cigarette held delicately between her fingers. She hadn't seen me yet. She took a long drag, exhaling a cloud of smoke that mixed with the mist. She looked annoyed. "Unbelievable," she muttered to herself. "Pierce is so drunk already, and Mom is driving me crazy about the photos." She turned, and her eyes landed on me. She didn't look surprised. She looked irritated, as if I were a piece of trash that someone had forgotten to take out. "Still here?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "I thought you might have walked home by now. It's not that far, is it? Only 10 miles? "It's pouring rain, Lara," I said, my voice steady despite the shivering. "So?" She flicked the ash from her cigarette onto the wet concrete, dangerously close to my foot. "You're used to the elements, aren't you? With your little gardening job, you're practically a plant yourself." She laughed at her own joke. It was a cruel, hollow sound. "Happy wedding day, Lara," I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my tone. "The dress looks beautiful. It must have cost a fortune." "It did," she smirked, smoothing the silk over her hips. "But you wouldn't know anything about that. How's the carpenter? Did he manage to fix a table today to pay for his gas money?" She took another step toward me, and in the dim light, I saw the malice in her eyes. She wasn't just my sister. She was a predator who sensed weakness, and for 32 years, I had been the wounded gazelle. But she didn't know the hunter was approaching the gate. She didn't know that the carpenter was coming, and he was bringing a storm that would wash all of this away. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since Grandma Rose died, I didn't feel the need to protect her. I didn't feel the need to be the water. "He's fine," I said quietly. "He's on his way." Lara rolled her eyes. "Great. Just tell him to park in the back. We don't want that rust bucket in the photos." She turned to go back inside, but stopped at the door, looking back at me with a smirk. "Oh, and Celia? Don't come in for the cake cutting. Mom thinks it would be better if you just faded away." She slammed the door. I sat there in the silence, the echo of her words vibrating in the air. Fade away. No, not tonight. Tonight. The ghosts were coming out to play, and the architect was finally going to claim her design. 3 months before, I found myself shivering in the rain. The Montrose family gathered for what was supposed to be a celebratory dinner. The air in my parents' dining room was always thin, sucked dry by the vacuum of their expectations. But that night it felt particularly suffocating. The occasion was the official announcement of the wedding date, but as usual, the spotlight had been hijacked by Pierce. Pierce worked as a senior project manager for Apex Structures, a mid-level construction firm that had recently been acquired by a massive conglomerate. He was a man who wore his ambition like cheap cologne, overpowering and ultimately offensive. He sat at the head of the table, a spot usually reserved for my father, swirling a glass of Merlot that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. He was wearing a suit that was too tight in the shoulders, a modern cut that he thought made him look European, but actually just made him look uncomfortable. "It is all about leverage," Pierce announced, his voice booming across the roast duck. "You have to know when to push and when to pull. That is how I closed the deal with the Portland distributors. Bam, just like that." He slammed his hand on the table for emphasis, making the fine china rattle. My mother, Eleanor, beamed at him. She looked at Pierce with the kind of adoration she usually reserved for high-end real estate listings. "You are so forceful, Pierce," she cooed. "That is exactly what a man needs to succeed in this economy. Isn't that right, Richard?" My father nodded, slicing his duck with surgical precision. "Absolutely. The business world has no room for hesitation. I sat across from Lara, who was busy checking her reflection in the back of her spoon, beside me. Declan was eating quietly, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. He was the only person at the table who didn't look like he was auditioning for a reality television show. "Speaking of leverage," Pierce said, setting his wine glass down and shooting his cuff to reveal a massive, gold-faced watch. It was gaudy, the kind of timepiece meant to scream wealth rather than whisper it. "Check out the new hardware, limited edition. I had to pull some serious strings to get on the waiting list." Lara gasped, reaching out to stroke his wrist. "Oh, honey, it is gorgeous. It matches your eyes." I suppressed a snort. Pierce's eyes were muddy brown. The watch face was a violent, metallic gold. "It is an investment," Pierce declared, puffing out his chest. $12,000, but it will double in value in 5 years. "You have to spend money to look like money, right?" I knew for a fact, because I had overheard him arguing with his credit card company on the phone in the hallway earlier, that the watch was purchased on a payment plan with an interest rate that bordered on criminal. He was 48 monthly installments away from actually owning that investment. Pierce's gaze slid across the table and landed on Declan. He looked down at Declan's hands, which were clean, but bore the inevitable small nicks and scratches of a man who worked with chisels and saws. Then, his eyes dropped to the floor, where Declan's boots were visible under the table. They were Red Wing Iron Rangers, well worn, scuffed at the toes, and older than my relationship with him. "You know, Declan," Pierce said, a smirk playing on his lips, "I could introduce you to my tailor, and maybe a good cobbler. Those boots look like they survived a war, a very long, losing war." The table went silent. My mother let out a small, sharp laugh, covering it with a cough. Declan didn't stop chewing. He swallowed, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and looked at Pierce with a mild expression. "They are comfortable, Pierce, and they protect my feet. That is all I require of them." "Comfort is for retirement," Pierce scoffed. "If you want to move up in the world, you have to dress for the job you want, not the job you have, unless, of course, the job you want is sweeping up sawdust." "I am happy with my station," Declan said simply. "Well, that is the problem, isn't it?" Pierce leaned back, picking a piece of duck out of his teeth. "No ambition. You see, I am on the fast track. Since Vanguard Zenith acquired our company, things are changing. They are looking for fresh blood, leadership material." I froze. Vanguard Zenith. I glanced at Declan. His face remained impassive, but I saw a tiny muscle in his jaw jump. Vanguard Zenith was Declan's company. He was the majority shareholder. He was the ghost in the machine, and here was Pierce, a mid-level manager in a subsidiary 3 levels down, lecturing the owner about ambition. "I hear Vanguard is a tough ship to steer," Declan said, his voice neutral. "For the weak, maybe." Pierce waved a dismissive hand. "But I have heard rumors. The upper management is shifting. They say there is a shadow board or some secret owner who calls the shots. But I bet it is just a bunch of old men asleep at the wheel. I am going to shake things up. I am aiming for regional vice president by the end of the fiscal year. And once I get there, I am going to purge the dead weight, all those low-level laborers who think good enough is acceptable. Gone." He made a slashing motion across his throat. "You plan to fire people?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. "Efficiency, Celia," Pierce corrected me with a condescending smile. "It is called trimming the fat. You wouldn't understand. It is a corporate strategy, not planting petunias." "Actually," I said, putting my fork down, "labor is the backbone of construction. If you fire the skilled workers, your projects will stall." "Laborers are a dime a dozen," Pierce laughed. "Ideas, vision, that is what costs money. That is what I bring to the table. In fact, I have a presentation next week for the board. It is going to blow their minds. I call it the Urban Oasis Initiative." He leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Picture this, a luxury resort, but vertical, built right into the city center. But here is the kicker. The entire facade is a living ecosystem, hydroponic walls, self-sustaining irrigation systems using greywater recycling, and a rooftop apiary to promote local pollination. It is green, it is sustainable, and it is going to make me a legend. My blood ran cold. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The urban oasis, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper, with a hexagonal structural grid to support the soil weight? Pierce blinked, looking surprised. Well, yes, exactly. How did you know about the grid? Because it is my design, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I drew that. I sketched that entire concept 3 weeks ago when you and Lara came over for drinks. I left the sketchbook on the coffee table when I went to the kitchen to get more wine. I looked at Lara. She was avoiding my eyes, suddenly very interested in her salad. I remember, I continued, my voice rising. I came back and you were looking at it. You took a picture of it with your phone. You said, "Cool drawing, Celia." You stole it. Silence descended on the table again, but this time it was heavy and dangerous. Pierce's face turned a mottled shade of red. Not from shame, but from anger. Excuse me? Stole? That is a serious accusation. Celia, parallel thinking happens all the time in creative fields. Great minds think alike, as they say. You don't know the first thing about hydroponic load-bearing structures, I snapped. You are a project manager, not an architect. If they ask you about the soil pH requirements for the vertical walls, what are you going to tell them? I will tell them to hire a gardener, Pierce shouted. Which is what you are, a glorified gardener. Celia, stop it. My mother's voice cut through the argument like a knife. She glared at me, her eyes hard. You are embarrassing yourself. You are always so jealous of Lara and Pierce. Just because Pierce has the business acumen to turn a doodle into a viable project does not mean he stole anything from you. A doodle? I choked out. It was a full schematic. It is intellectual property, Declan said. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made the silverware vibrate. If it is her design, it belongs to her. Stay out of this, Carpenter, my father growled. This is family business. Celia, apologize to Pierce immediately. You are trying to ruin his big moment. I looked around the table. My mother's cold disdain, my father's anger, Lara's cowardly silence, and Pierce's smug, triumphant grin. He knew he had won. He knew that in this court, the truth didn't matter. Only the narrative did. I felt Declan's hand grip my knee under the table. It was a warning and a comfort. Let him go. The grip said, let him dig his own grave. I took a deep breath, swallowing the scream that was clawing at my throat. Fine, I said, my voice trembling. I apologize. I must have been mistaken. Pierce sat back, adjusting his lapels. Apology accepted. I am a big man. I can forgive a little hysteria. Good, Eleanor said, clapping her hands once as if concluding a business meeting. Now that we have settled that, we need to discuss the wedding budget. We are stretching it thin with the venue costs. She turned her gaze on me, her eyes narrowing. Since you have so much free time to draw schematics, Celia, and since you claim to be an expert on plants, I have decided that you will handle the floral arrangements for the wedding. The flowers? I asked. Mom, professional floral design for a wedding of this size costs thousands of dollars. The labor alone... Oh, stop counting pennies, she waved her hand. You have access to wholesalers, don't you? And you can do the labor yourself. It will be your wedding gift to your sister. God knows you cannot afford to buy her anything off the registry. You want me to do all the flowers? The centerpieces? The bouquets? The altar? I asked, stunned by the audacity. And the entrance arch, Lara added, finally speaking up. I want white orchids, hundreds of them, cascading, like a waterfall. Orchids are expensive, Lara, I said. Figure it out, my father grunted. Consider it rent payment for all the years we supported you before you married him. I looked at Declan again. His face was a mask of stone. I knew he could write a check right now that would cover the flowers, the venue, and buy the entire block this house stood on. But that wasn't the point. They wanted my labor. They wanted my submission. Fine, I said, defeated. I will do the flowers. Excellent, Pierce grinned. Now, one last thing. We have a logistical issue with the guest arrival. The valet service the venue provides is terribly understaffed. We are expecting some high-profile guests. The board members I mentioned? They drive cars that cost more than your house. Declan. Pierce turned his full attention to my husband, a cruel glint in his eyes. We need someone we can trust to handle the VIP vehicles, Pierce said. Someone who knows how to drive a stick shift, obviously, and someone who won't be tempted to take a joyride. Declan, I was thinking you could handle the valet duties for the first 2 hours. The insult was so grotesque I almost laughed. They wanted the husband of the bride's sister to park cars. You want Declan to work as a valet at your wedding? I asked, my voice deadly calm. It is a chance for him to be useful. Pierce shrugged. And honestly, it is a networking opportunity. You get to open the door for the CEO of Westtech. You get to see the interior of a McLaren. It is an education for a guy like you. Declan, you should thank me. He is a guest, I hissed. He is my husband. He is family, Lara said, sipping her wine. Family helps out. You are doing the flowers. He can park the cars. Why are you being so difficult? Celia? It is okay. Celia, Declan said. I whipped my head around to look at him. It is not okay. Declan looked at Pierce, and for a second, I saw the shark swim behind his eyes. It was terrifying and beautiful. I would be happy to, Declan said, a small, polite smile playing on his lips. I have always appreciated fine engineering. I will make sure every car is handled with the respect it deserves. Great! Pierce slapped the table. That is settled. Just wear something professional. A black vest, maybe? We can get you a uniform. I have a suit, Declan said. Right, your funeral suit. Just try to brush the sawdust off. Pierce laughed. I knew something the others didn't. I noticed the way Pierce's phone kept vibrating on the table, lighting up with notifications he quickly swiped away. I had seen the screen once, just for a second, when he went to the bathroom and left it unlocked. It was a betting app, and the numbers were red. Deep, deep red. Pierce wasn't just arrogant. He was desperate. He needed this promotion, and he needed this wedding to cement his status. Because underneath the leased BMW and the installment plan watch, he was drowning. He was gambling on sports, on stocks, on anything that gave him a rush, trying to fill the hole where his soul should have been. He thought he was the king of the world tonight. He thought he had just duped a poor carpenter into serving him. But as I looked at Declan, who was calmly slicing a piece of pear for dessert, I realized the truth. Pierce hadn't hired a servant. He had just handed the keys to his destruction to the executioner. I will take good care of the VIPs, Declan said softly, almost to himself. I will make sure they know exactly who is running the show. Pierce didn't hear the threat. He just heard the obedience. He raised his glass. To the wedding, and to my inevitable promotion. To the wedding, we all murmured. I drank my wine, and it tasted like vinegar. But as I watched Pierce preen, I held on to one thought. The higher the monkey climbs, the more he shows his ass. And Pierce was climbing very, very high. The unraveling began exactly 14 days before the ceremony. $30,000, I choked. 30,000? I thought Mom and Dad covered the venue. They paid the deposit, Lara sobbed. Pierce was supposed to cover the rest with his bonus, but the bonus got delayed because of some corporate red tape. He said the wire transfer is stuck, but the venue won't wait. They don't care. You have to help me. Celia, please, you are the only one I can talk to. If I tell Dad, he will have a heart attack. If I tell Mom, she will never let Pierce live it down. Lara, I don't have $30,000 lying around, I said, my stomach twisting. This wasn't entirely true, but the money I did have was sacred. It was the freedom fund Declan and I had built, not from his billions, but from our own humble earnings. It was money from my landscaping projects and his custom furniture sales. It was honest money. "You have savings," she shrieked. "I know you do. You live like a pauper. You drive that piece of junk car. You must have money tucked away. Please, Celia. It is just a loan. Pierce will pay you back the second his bonus clears next week. I promise. On my life. On Grandma Rose's grave." She played the Grandma Rose card. She knew exactly where to aim the dagger. I looked at the fern in my hands, its delicate fronds trembling in the breeze. I thought about the humiliation at dinner. I thought about the way she had let Pierce mock my husband. I should have hung up. I should have let her world burn. But then I heard her gasp for air, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic that reminded me of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "I will talk to Declan," I said, my voice heavy with resignation. I found Declan in the garage, sanding a mahogany table leg. I told him everything. He stopped sanding, wiping the dust from his hands with a rag, his expression unreadable. "She is lying about the bonus," Declan said calmly. "Vanguard Zenith pays bonuses in December." "It is October." "I know," I said, leaning against his workbench. "But if the wedding gets canceled, she will be destroyed, and Mom and Dad, the shame will kill them. You know how they are." Declan looked at me for a long moment. "This isn't about them. It is about you. You want to save her." "She is my sister," I whispered. "I hate her sometimes, but I don't want to see her destroyed." Declan sighed, tossing the rag onto the bench. "Okay, but we do this my way. We use the joint savings account, the money we made ourselves, not the trust, not the offshore accounts. If we are going to bail them out, it has to be real sacrifice, or it means nothing." We went to the bank an hour later. It hurt. It physically hurt to sign that cashier's check. That was 3 years of my hard work. That was the down payment on the historic farmhouse we wanted to restore for ourselves. "One condition," Declan said as I held the check. "Do not give it to her directly. If she knows it comes from us, she will resent us. Or worse, she will think she can come back for more. Send it anonymously." So I did. I wired the money directly to the venue under the name the Anonymous Arts Foundation, a vague moniker I made up on the spot. I texted Lara. I made some calls to a client of mine who runs a charity. They agreed to sponsor the venue as a tax write-off. The money is paid. You are safe. I expected relief. I expected a thank you. What I got was a masterclass in gaslighting. 2 days later, at a family brunch I was foolish enough to attend, the mood was euphoric. Lara was glowing, clutching Pierce's arm as if he were a war hero. "It was a miracle," Lara gushed to my parents, her eyes shining. "Pierce has these incredible connections. Apparently, one of his silent partners, a huge admirer of his architectural vision, heard about the mix-up and just stepped in. He said, 'The world needs to see Pierce's wedding.'" Can you believe that? I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "A silent partner?" "Yes," Pierce interjected, puffing on a cigar. "Big guy in the industry. Prefers to stay under the radar. He has been following my work on the Urban Oasis project. He told the venue manager, 'Put it on my tab.' That is the kind of respect I command in this town. Richard," my father nodded, looking at Pierce with renewed awe. "That is impressive, son. Truly impressive. It shows character. People invest in people." "Exactly," Pierce grinned. He knew that a man of my caliber shouldn't be bothered with clerical errors like a missed deadline. I looked at Lara. She met my gaze for a split second, then looked away, giggling at something my mother said. She knew. She knew exactly where that money came from. I had texted her, but she had rewritten the narrative to fit the fantasy. In her version, her husband was a powerful magnet for investors, not a broke gambler saved by her landscaping sister. I felt Declan's hand on my thigh, squeezing hard. "Breathe," his touch said. Just breathe. But the knife twisted deeper the following week. I stopped by Lara's apartment to drop off the sketches for the floral arrangements. Thousands of dollars of labor I was doing for free. The door was unlocked, so I walked in. The living room was cluttered with wedding paraphernalia, and there, sitting on the dining table, was a brand new, bright orange Hermes box. My heart stopped. I walked over and opened the lid. Inside was a Birkin bag, a 30-centimeter, Togo leather Birkin. The receipt was tucked under the bag. $12,000. The date on the receipt was yesterday. Lara walked out of the bedroom, wearing a silk robe. She froze when she saw me standing over the box. "Celia," she chirped, her voice high and brittle. "I didn't hear you come in." "Where did you get this?" I asked, pointing at the bag. "Oh, that?" She waved a dismissive hand. Pierce bought it for me. As a pre-wedding gift." "Pierce is broke, Lara," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "He couldn't pay the venue deposit. How did he buy a $12,000 bag?" "He got an advance," she stammered. "And besides, we had some leftover budget from the sponsorship." I felt the blood drain from my face. "The sponsorship? You mean the money I sent? That was exactly the amount needed for the venue. There shouldn't be any leftover." "Well," Lara shifted her weight, crossing her arms defensively, "the venue actually gave us a discount because they liked Pierce so much. So there was a credit, and I needed a bag for the honeymoon. You can't expect me to go to Paris with a Coach bag. Celia, it would be embarrassing." She had skimmed off the top. I had emptied my savings to save her life, and she had used the surplus to buy a purse. "You are unbelievable," I whispered. "I sold my car. Lara, I sold my car. Nobody asked you to do that," she snapped, her face twisting into ugly lines. "You always have to be the martyr, don't you? Poor Celia, suffering for everyone. You did it because you wanted to feel superior. Well, congratulations. You are superior. Are you happy now?" I walked out. I didn't say another word. I left the floral sketches on the floor. When I got home, I found Declan in his study. He wasn't working on furniture. He was sitting in front of 3 monitors, streams of data scrolling down the screens. He looked up when I entered, and his eyes were cold. Not at me, but at the world. "You were right," he said softly. "About what?" I asked, collapsing onto the sofa. "About Pierce. I decided to dig a little deeper, since he is technically an employee of a Vanguard subsidiary. His financial records are accessible to internal audit." Declan turned a screen toward me. It was a spreadsheet filled with highlighted red rows. "He is not just gambling his own money," Declan explained, his finger tracing the lines. "He has been padding the invoices for the last 3 projects. Small amounts at first. 500 here for consulting fees. 1,000 there for material overages. But in the last month, it ramped up. He falsified a bid for a concrete supplier. He took a kickback of $15,000 from a vendor to approve substandard steel reinforcement." "Substandard steel?" I gasped. "Declan, that is dangerous. That building could collapse." "Exactly," Declan said. "He is not just a thief. He is a liability. A dangerous one. And he is doing it all under the Vanguard banner." He turned back to the screen, typing a command. A new window popped up. It was a personnel file. Pierce's face smiled back from the digital photo, smug and oblivious. "I could fire him now," Declan said, his voice flat. "I could send security to his office tomorrow and have him escorted out in handcuffs. The police would be interested in the kickbacks. But the wedding," I said automatically, "if you arrest him now." "The wedding," Declan repeated, tasting the word like poison. "Yes, the grand stage, the networking event, the moment where he plans to impress the shadow board." Declan turned his chair to face me. The look in his eyes was terrifying. It wasn't anger anymore. It was judgment. "He wants to meet the owner of Vanguard Zenith," Declan said. "He wants to show off his urban oasis idea to the top brass. He invited the board members. Celia, he sent invites to my own executive team, thinking they don't know who I am." "What are you going to do?" I asked, a shiver running down my spine. "I am going to give him exactly what he wants." Declan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "He wants the boss at his wedding? He will get the boss? He wants a performance review? He will get one." He stood up and walked over to me, kneeling down to take my hands. "I am not going to stop the wedding," he said. "Let them have their ceremony. Let them say their vows. Let them think they have gotten away with it all. The theft, the lies, the way they treated you. And then, when the champagne is poured and the toasts begin, I am going to clean house." I mean, I am going to fire him," Declan said. "In front of everyone, in front of the people he tried to impress, in front of your parents. I am going to show them that the man they worship is a criminal, and the man they despise holds the keys to their kingdom." He kissed my knuckles, one by one. "This is the end of the water. Celia," he whispered. "The flood is coming. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to build a dam. I wanted to watch the water rise." The rehearsal dinner was held in the garden room of the estate, a glass-walled conservatory that smelled of forced lilies and old money. If the wedding itself was meant to be a coronation, this dinner was the royal court asserting its hierarchy, and in the court of the Montrose family. My husband and I had been assigned the role of court jesters. We were not seated at the long mahogany table where my parents, Lara, Pierce, and the bridal party held court. We were not even seated at the secondary round tables reserved for aunts, uncles, and cousins. Declan and I were seated at table 9. Table 9 was a low, circular table in the far corner, nestled dangerously close to the swinging kitchen doors. The chairs were noticeably smaller than the others. My dinner companions were Pierce's 4-year-old nephew, who was currently smashing a bread roll into a fine powder with a spoon, and a sullen teenage cousin who was wearing headphones. "This is cozy," Declan murmured, unfolding his napkin. He had to hunch his broad shoulders to avoid knocking over the centerpiece, which was a pathetic arrangement of carnations, clearly the budget option compared to the orchids on the main table. "I am so sorry," I whispered, staring at my plate. "We can leave. We can just leave right now." "And miss the show?" Declan shook his head, a small, cold smile playing on his lips. "Not a chance. I want to see how far they will go." It didn't take long. Halfway through the second course, Pierce stood up. He had already consumed 3 glasses of wine and his face was flushed with the heat of his own ego. He clinked his spoon against his glass, demanding silence. "Attention, everyone!" Pierce boomed. He draped an arm around Lara, who looked like a porcelain doll that had been glazed with too much hairspray. "I just want to say a few words about gratitude. Gratitude for this beautiful venue. Gratitude for my future in-laws, Richard and Eleanor, for raising such a let's say decorative daughter." Laughter rippled through the room. Lara giggled, taking it as a compliment. "And," Pierce continued, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto our corner, "gratitude for the little people, the ones who keep the wheels turning while the rest of us drive the car." He pointed his wineglass directly at Declan. "To Declan!" Pierce shouted. "Our resident handyman. You know, guys." He turned to his groomsmen, who were snickering into their napkins. "This man is a wizard. I bet if the toilet backs up tonight, he is the first guy we call. Isn't that right, Declan? Always ready to get your hands dirty so the rest of us can stay clean?" The room went silent. Waiting for the reaction, my father let out a short, barking laugh. My mother sipped her water, looking bored. Declan slowly picked up his water glass. He didn't stand. He didn't look angry. He looked at Pierce with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a bacteria culture. "I fix what is broken, Pierce," Declan said, his voice calm but carrying effortlessly across the room. "It is a useful skill. You should try it sometime, before things fall apart completely." Pierce laughed, dismissing the warning. "See? A simple man with simple pleasures. Cheers to the help." I gripped my butter knife so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to throw it. I wanted to scream that the handyman could buy and sell everyone in this room before breakfast, but then, the double doors at the entrance opened. The chatter died down as a man in a charcoal gray suit walked in. He was older, with silver hair and a posture that commanded instant respect. He wasn't on the guest list I had seen. Pierce froze. His eyes bulged. He practically tripped over his own chair, scrambling to get to the door. "Mr. Sterling?" Pierce exclaimed, his voice cracking an octave higher. "My God, I didn't think you would make it. I sent the invite as a formality. I never dreamed." I recognized the name, Arthur Sterling. He was the CEO of Westech Banking, the primary financial partner for all of Vanguard Zenith's major developments. He was a titan of industry. "I was in the area, Mr." Sterling said, his voice gravelly and unimpressed. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the crowd. "I heard there was a gathering involving Vanguard personnel. I thought I would pay my respects." Of course. Pierce was practically bowing. "I am Pierce, the groom. We met briefly at the convention in Chicago. I am the one leading the Urban Oasis project, the vertical garden concept." "Ah, yes, the vertical garden," Sterling said flatly. He didn't extend his hand. Sterling's gaze continued to sweep the room. He looked past my parents, past the groomsmen, past the orchids, and then he stopped. He was looking at the kids' table. He was looking at Declan. I saw Sterling's eyes widen. I saw his mouth open slightly, the beginning of a greeting forming on his lips. He took a step forward, ignoring Pierce. "Mr. Va..." Declan moved. It was subtle. He simply raised his index finger to his lips, a gesture that lasted less than a second, and then gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. "Mr." Sterling stopped dead in his tracks. He blinked, confusion washing over his face, followed immediately by realization. He looked from Declan's rough work boots to the tiny chair he was squeezed into, and then back to Declan's calm, commanding eyes. The message was received. Sterling cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. He turned back to Pierce, who was oblivious to the silent exchange that had just happened. "Mr. Sterling?" Pierce asked. "Can I get you a drink? A seat at the head table?" "No," Sterling said, his voice cooler than before. "I cannot stay. I just wanted to see the caliber of the people Vanguard is employing these days. I believe I've seen enough." "Oh, well, thank you," Pierce beamed, taking it as praise. "We are definitely raising the bar. Top tier." "Indeed," Sterling said dryly. He cast one last, respectful glance at Declan, a look that bordered on reverence, and turned on his heel. "Good luck tomorrow. Son, you are going to need it." He walked out. Pierce turned to the room, pumping his fist. "Did you see that? Arthur Sterling, at my rehearsal dinner. The big leagues, baby." I looked at Declan. He was calmly cutting a piece of chicken for the 4-year-old beside him. "He knows," I whispered. "Arthur is a smart man," Declan replied softly. "He knows when to speak, and he knows when to watch." The dinner dragged on. The air became thick with cigar smoke and self-congratulation. I felt suffocated. "I need air," I told Declan. "I will wait for you," he said. I walked out of the conservatory and down the hallway toward the restrooms. The corridor was dimly lit, lined with portraits of the estate's previous owners. As I passed the library, a room currently being used as a staging area for the groomsmen, I heard a voice. It was Pierce. I stopped. The door was cracked open a few inches. I knew I should keep walking. I knew nothing good could come from listening, but my feet were rooted to the spot. "Baby, relax," Pierce was saying. His tone was low, intimate, a tone he never used with Lara. "I told you, it is just a show. Yes, I have to say the vows. It is part of the deal." Pause. "No, listen to me. The old man. Richard? He is signing over the deed to the lake house as a wedding gift, and the dowry check clears on Monday. Once that money is in my account, and once I get the promotion at Vanguard, I am done. I give it 6 months. Tops. I will claim irreconcilable differences, take half the assets, and then I am all yours. I covered my mouth with my hand to stifle a gasp. Lara? Pierce laughed. A cruel, ugly sound. She is a cash cow, sweetheart. Nothing more. She is annoying. She is clingy, and she has the IQ of a hamster. But her parents are loaded. Just be patient. When I come to see you next week, I will bring you that bracelet you wanted. Okay? Love you too. The call ended. I felt like I was going to vomit. My knees shook as I backed away from the door, turning and running down the hall. I had to tell her. I didn't care about the past. I didn't care about the stolen designs or the insults. No woman deserved this. No sister deserved to be a pawn in a con artist's game. I found Lara in the bridal suite. She was touching up her makeup, surrounded by 3 bridesmaids who were cooing over her lipstick shade. Out, I ordered, my voice trembling. Everyone out. I need to talk to my sister. The bridesmaids looked at Lara. She rolled her eyes but waved them away. Make it quick. Celia, I have to go cut the cake. When the door clicked shut, I grabbed her shoulders. You cannot marry him, I said, the words rushing out. Lara, listen to me. I just heard him on the phone. He has a mistress. He is only marrying you for the dowry and the lake house. He plans to leave you in 6 months. Lara stared at me. Her expression didn't change. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look devastated. She looked annoyed. Is that it? She asked. Did you hear me? I shook her. He is cheating on you. He called you a cash cow. He is using you. Lara pulled away from my grip, smoothing her dress. You really are pathetic. You know that? What? You are so jealous, she hissed, her eyes narrowing into slits. You cannot stand it, can you? You cannot stand that I'm getting the fairy tale. You want to ruin it. You want to plant doubts in my head, so I will call it off and be miserable like you. I am telling you the truth, I screamed. Why would I lie about this? Because you are envious, Lara shouted back. You are married to a loser who fixes chairs, and I am marrying a future vice president. Of course Pierce has distractions. Powerful men always do. I don't care. As long as he comes home to me, as long as I get the ring and the status, I don't care. He called you stupid. Lara, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. He said you have the IQ of a hamster. Slap. The sound was sharp and loud in the small room. My cheeks stung with a sudden, burning heat. I stumbled back, holding my face, staring at my sister in disbelief. Get out, Lara spat, her finger pointing at the door. Get out of my face, and if you say one word of this to Mom or Dad, I will tell them you tried to hit me. I will tell them you were drunk. Who do you think they will believe? The princess or the jealous shadow? The door opened behind me. It was Eleanor. What is going on here? My mother demanded, looking at my red cheek and Lara's heaving chest. Celia is trying to ruin everything, Lara wailed, instantly turning on the tears. She is making up horrible lies about Pierce. She is trying to stress me out. Eleanor turned to me, her face hardening into a mask of pure ice. I should have known, Eleanor said quietly. You cannot handle her happiness, can you? Mom, he is cheating. Enough, Eleanor snapped. I do not want to hear it. You are toxic. Celia, you are a dark cloud hovering over this family. She stepped closer to me, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Tomorrow, you will not be in the official photos. You will stay in the background. You will not stand near the altar. You will not give a toast. If I see you anywhere near the photographer, I will have security remove you. Do you understand? I looked at my mother. I looked at my sister. And I finally saw them, not as family, but as strangers who shared my DNA. I understand, I said. My voice was dead. I understand perfectly. I walked out of the suite. I walked down the hall, past the laughing guests, past the open bar, out the front door into the night air. It was cold. The wind was picking up, whipping the trees into a frenzy. Declan was waiting for me by the entrance. He took one look at my face, at the red handprint blooming on my cheek, and his expression shifted. The calm mask shattered. For the first time, I saw the true violence he was capable of. Not physical violence, but the terrifying, calculated wrath of a man who could level mountains. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was iron. "Who did that?" he asked. His voice was a low growl. "Lara," I said. I tried to warn her. She didn't want to hear it. Declan didn't say anything for a long time. He pulled me into his arms, pressing my head against his chest. I could hear his heart beating. Slow, steady, powerful. "Go to the car," he said softly. "What are you going to do?" I asked, looking up at him. "Nothing tonight," he said. He reached up and gently brushed his thumb over my stinging cheek. "But listen to me. Celia, listen closely." He looked deep into my eyes, and I saw a fire burning there that I had never seen before. "Tomorrow," he said, enunciating every word. "Tomorrow. You will not bow. You will not apologize. You will not hide. Tomorrow. They are going to learn that they have been kicking a wolf and calling it a dog." "Declan, please don't fight them," I begged, thinking he meant a physical altercation. "Pierce isn't worth it." "I am not going to fight them. My love," Declan smiled, and it was the scariest thing I had ever seen. "I am going to end them." We walked to our car in silence. As we drove away from the estate, I looked out the window. The moon was gone. The sky above Seattle was a bruised purple, heavy and swollen. Clouds were stacking up like black towers on the horizon, blocking out the stars. The air pressure was dropping. You could feel it in your ears. "It is going to storm," I whispered. "Yes," Declan said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "It is going to be a hell of a storm." We drove into the darkness, leaving the lights of the Golden Oak estate behind us, unaware that we were the lightning that was about to strike. The text message to Declan still hovered on my screen. Unread. "Are you here yet? I can't take this anymore." I stared at the glowing pixels until the screen timed out and faded to black, plunging me back into the gloom of the service patio. The rain had intensified, shifting from a steady drizzle to a torrential downpour that hammered against the corrugated plastic roof above me. The sound was deafening, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the jazz music drifting from the ballroom. My sanctuary. If one could call a few square feet of concrete behind a dumpster a sanctuary, was failing. A crack in the plastic sheeting directly above my head had begun to widen under the weight of the water. At first, it was just a drop every few seconds, a cold, startling tap against my shoulder. But now, it was a steady, icy stream. It soaked through the fabric of my dress, chilling the skin beneath, sending shivers racing down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the hollow ache of abandonment. I shifted my chair, dragging the plastic legs against the grit of the concrete, trying to find a dry spot. There was none. The wind had shifted, whipping the rain sideways, misting my face and arms with freezing water. My hair, which I had spent an hour carefully pinning up this morning, hung in limp, wet strands around my face. I could feel the mascara I had applied, cheap, non-waterproof, beginning to smudge under my eyes. I wrapped my arms around my chest, trying to preserve whatever body heat I had left. I looked like a refugee. I felt like a ghost, inside. Through the condensation-fogged windows, I could see the blurry shapes of the guests. They were warm, they were dry, they were holding crystal flutes filled with amber liquid, their mouths moving in laughter I couldn't hear. It looked like a silent film of a life I was not allowed to live. The heavy metal door to the kitchen swung open again. I flinched, expecting the kind waiter to return, perhaps to tell me I had to leave. But it wasn't the waiter. A cloud of expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5 mixed with something sweet and cloying, hit me before she did. Lara stepped out onto the patio, the door clicking shut behind her. She was a vision of bridal perfection, at least from a distance. Her dress was a masterpiece of lace and structure, the corset hugging her waist, the skirt billowing out like a cloud. But up close, in the harsh, flickering light of the security bulb, her face was twisted into a scowl. She glanced around nervously, checking the corners of the patio, before reaching into the hidden pocket of her gown and pulling out a slim silver case and a lighter. "Finally," she muttered, the sweet, innocent bride facade dropping instantly. She flicked the lighter, the flame illuminating the sharp angles of her face, and took a long, desperate drag. She exhaled a plume of gray smoke that swirled into the rain, her shoulders relaxing slightly. She hadn't seen me yet. I was tucked into the shadows, a piece of debris in the corner of her perfect night. "You shouldn't smoke in that dress," I said, my voice hoarse from the cold. "The smell will stick to the lace." Lara jumped, nearly dropping her cigarette. She spun around, her eyes narrowing as she peered into the gloom. When she recognized me, the shock on her face was replaced instantly by a sneer of pure disgust. "Jesus, Celia," she hissed, taking another drag. "You are like a cockroach. You are just everywhere, aren't you?" "Mom told me to wait here," I said, not moving. "I am just following orders, like always." Lara stepped closer, her heels clicking on the wet concrete. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my wet hair, my shivering shoulders, and the water stains spreading across the shoulder of my dress. She laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, brittle sound. "Look at you," she said, shaking her head. "You look like a drowned rat. Honestly, Celia, it is pathetic. No wonder your husband is such a loser. Who would want to come home to this?" "Leave Declan out of this," I said, gripping the arms of my plastic chair. "Why?" Lara asked, flicking ash onto the floor. "He is the only thing you have, isn't he? And he is nothing, just a handyman with a truck. You two deserve each other. You are both just gray, dull, useless." "I paid for this venue, Lara," I said quietly. The secret burned in my throat. I hadn't planned to say it. I had promised Declan, but the injustice was choking me. Lara froze. She stared at me for a second, and then she threw her head back and laughed louder. "You?" she cackled. "You paid? Oh, please. You can barely pay for your own haircut. Don't try to take credit for Pierce's connections. You are delusional. Celia, jealousy has actually made you crazy." "I sent the money," I insisted. Standing up, my legs were stiff from the cold. $30,000. The Anonymous Arts Foundation. That was me. That was our savings. Lara's face hardened. She took a step toward me, invading my personal space. The tip of her cigarette glowed red, dangerously close to my arm. "If you ever," she whispered, her voice like a razor, "ever tell anyone that lie, I will make sure you never see Mom and Dad again. I will tell them you stole from us. I will tell them you tried to blackmail me. Pierce is a vice president. Celia, who are they going to believe? The successful man, or the sister who sits by the dumpsters?" I looked at her, at the hatred in her eyes, and I felt something inside me break. It wasn't my heart. It was my resolve. "I am leaving," I said. "I am going home." I turned to grab my purse. I couldn't wait for Declan. I would walk. I would crawl if I had to. I just needed to get away from her. "Stop," Lara commanded. I didn't stop. I took a step toward the exit. Lara moved quickly, blocking my path. She held out her hand, the cigarette burning down to the filter. "I am not done with this," she said. "And there is no ashtray over here. Hold this." I stared at her hand. "What?" "Hold it," she said, thrusting the smoldering butt toward me. "I am not throwing it on the ground. I might step on it and ruin my shoes. Be useful for once in your life. Celia, be my ashtray." "No," I said, pushing past her. "I said hold it!" Lara shrieked. She grabbed my arm with her free hand, her nails digging into my flesh. We struggled. It was brief and ugly. I tried to pull away, and she yanked me back. In her other hand, She was holding a glass of red wine she had brought out with her, a heavy, full-bodied Cabernet. "Let go of me!" I cried out. "You are ruining my night!" Lara screamed, and then, with a look of sudden, calculated malice, she stopped pulling. Instead, she jerked her hand forward. The contents of the wine glass launched into the air. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the dark red liquid arc through the rain, catching the dim light like a spray of rubies. It splashed across my chest, soaking into the fabric of my pale cream dress instantly. The cold liquid hit my skin, followed by the stain. The wine ran down the front of the dress, branching out like veins. Like an open wound, it dripped onto my skirt, turning the elegant cream fabric into a bloodied, splotchy mess. I gasped, looking down at myself. The stain was enormous. It was indelible. Lara stood back, her eyes wide, but there was no regret in them. There was only triumph. "Oh my God!" Lara screamed, her voice pitching up into a theatrical wail of distress. "Celia, what did you do?" She dropped the wine glass. It shattered on the concrete, the sound sharp and violent. "You clumsy idiot!" Lara yelled, loud enough for the kitchen staff to hear. "You bumped into me! Look at what you did! You spilled wine all over yourself, and you almost got it on my dress." I stood there, shaking. The wine smelled pungent and sour, mixing with the smell of rain and trash. I felt dirty. I felt marked. "You threw it," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You did that on purpose. Why would I waste good wine on you?" Lara scoffed. She turned toward the door, where a large man in a black security uniform had just appeared, drawn by the noise. "Help!" Lara cried, pointing at me. "This woman is drunk. She is causing a scene. She attacked me." The security guard stepped out into the rain. He was a brute of a man, with a thick neck and a face that suggested he enjoyed his job a little too much. He looked at Lara, the weeping, beautiful bride in white, and then at me, the soaked, disheveled woman covered in what looked like blood. The judgment was instant. "Is there a problem here, Mrs. Vance?" the guard asked, addressing Lara by her new married name. "Yes," Lara sobbed, squeezing out fake tears. "She is my sister, but she has a drinking problem. She came out here and started screaming at me. She threw her wine everywhere. Please, just get her out of here. I don't want my guests to see her like this. It is disgusting." The guard turned to me. He didn't ask for my side of the story. He reached out and grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into the muscle hard enough to bruise. "All right, let's go. Miss," he grunted. "Party is over for you." "I didn't do anything," I said, my voice breaking. "Please, she is lying. I am waiting for my husband." "You can wait for him on the curb," the guard said, pulling me toward the side gate that led to the parking lot. "You are trespassing now. The bride wants you gone. Lara, please." I looked back at my sister. Lara was standing under the awning, safe and dry. She had composed herself instantly. She pulled a compact mirror from her pocket and checked her lipstick, not even looking at me as I was dragged away. "Get her out of my sight," Lara said coldly to the reflection in her mirror. "She doesn't fit the aesthetic." The guard shoved me forward. I stumbled on the wet pavement, nearly falling into a puddle. The rain was blinding now. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. I had spent my whole life trying to be good. I had spent my whole life trying to be the water, to flow around the rocks, to keep the peace. I had given them my money, my talent, my dignity, and this was the result. I was being thrown out like garbage. The guard dragged me to the edge of the service driveway. Right where the delivery trucks unloaded, there was a metal bar separating the estate from the main road. "Stay here," the guard warned, releasing my arm with a shove. "If you try to come back inside, I will call the cops. And trust me, you don't want to spend the night in a cell looking like that." He turned and walked back toward the warmth of the building, leaving me alone in the dark. I stood there, the rain plastering the wine-stained dress to my body. I felt a coldness that went deeper than my skin. It was the coldness of absolute realization. They didn't love me. They didn't even like me. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a resource to be used until I was empty, and then discarded. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. I looked at the red stain on my chest. It looked like a target. I closed my eyes and tilted my head back. Letting the rain wash over my face, I wanted it to wash me away. I wanted to dissolve into the pavement and disappear. "Declan," I whispered into the storm. "Where are you?" I was broken. I was done. I had nothing left to give. And then, through the roar of the rain and the pounding of my own heart, I heard a sound. It was a low, deep rumble. Not thunder. It was mechanical. It was the sound of an engine, a powerful 12-cylinder engine growling in the distance. I opened my eyes. Two beams of light cut through the darkness like lasers. They were blindingly white, far brighter than the yellow halogen of the street lamps. They swept across the wet asphalt, illuminating the falling rain like diamonds. The car was coming fast. It wasn't slowing down for the speed bumps. It was tearing up the driveway with a ferocity that matched the storm. I squinted against the glare. It wasn't the beat-up Ford pickup truck I was used to. It was a monster, a black, sleek, terrifyingly beautiful machine that looked like a weapon on wheels. The car screeched to a halt inches from the bar where I stood. The door flew open before the engine even died. A figure stepped out into the rain. He didn't have an umbrella. He didn't run for cover. He walked toward me with a stride that ate up the distance between us. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like armor. But I knew that walk. I knew the set of those shoulders. Declan. He stopped 3 feet away from me. The headlights of the car framed him in a halo of light. He looked at my wet hair. He looked at my shivering body. And then, his eyes dropped to the red stain on my dress. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look on his face wasn't the look of a carpenter. It wasn't the look of a husband. It was the look of a king who had just found his queen bleeding on the battlefield. And God help the person who had held the knife. The security guard's hand was still gripping my bicep, his fingers digging into my flesh with unnecessary force. When the world exploded into white light, it happened in a fraction of a second. One moment, I was staring into the abyss of the rainy parking lot, resigned to my fate as the discarded sister. The next, a pair of high-intensity xenon beams cut through the darkness like the eyes of a waking dragon, blinding both me and my captor. The guard flinched, throwing up a hand to shield his eyes. "What the hell?" he shouted over the roar of the rain. "Hey, you can't park here. This is a restricted—" He never finished the sentence. The vehicle did not slow down. It did not hesitate at the sight of the red and white striped security barrier that blocked the service entrance. With a sickening crunch of metal and plastic that sounded like a gunshot, the massive SUV smashed through the wooden arm of the gate, sending splintered fragments spinning into the night air. The barrier was obliterated as if it were made of matchsticks. The car roared forward, the tires hissing violently against the wet asphalt, and screeched to a halt less than 5 feet from where we stood. It was a beast of a machine. It was not the rusted Ford pickup truck that my family loved to mock. It was a matte black, armored Cadillac Escalade, extended wheelbase, with tinted windows so dark they looked like voids in reality. On the front fender, fluttering snappingly in the wind, was a small but distinct flag, a silver V intersecting a gold Z on a field of deep navy blue, the crest of Vanguard Zenith. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew that logo. I had seen it on the letterheads in Declan's study, but seeing it here, mounted on a vehicle that looked like it belonged in a presidential motorcade, was a shock that stole the breath from my lungs. The guard released my arm, stumbling back a few steps. His bravado evaporated instantly. He reached for the radio on his belt, his hands shaking. "Central, we have a breach at the service gate. We have a—" The rear door of the SUV flew open. A man stepped out. He did not run. He did not cower from the storm. He placed one foot on the pavement and rose to his full height with a slow, deliberate grace that commanded silence. It was Declan. But it was not the Declan my family knew. Gone were the flannel shirt, the sawdust-covered jeans, and the scuffed work boots. In their place stood a man dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit that I knew. With my architect's eye for structure, was bespoke Italian tailoring. The fabric was impeccable, hugging his broad shoulders and tapering perfectly at the waist. His shirt was crisp white, fastened with platinum cufflinks that caught the harsh glare of the headlights. His shoes were black Oxfords, polished to a mirror shine that repelled the rain. He looked like a titan. He looked like war. Behind him, the other doors opened. 3 people exited the vehicle with military precision. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in sharp black suits, moving with the efficiency of highly trained operatives. One of the men held a large, professional-grade umbrella, which he immediately snapped open and held over Declan's head. The woman held a tablet against her chest, her eyes scanning the perimeter like a hawk. The third man, older, with silver hair and a briefcase, I recognized instantly from the news. It was Marcus Thorne, the chief legal counsel for Vanguard Zenith, a man known in the business world as the Shark of Seattle. The atmosphere in the service yard shifted instantly. The air grew heavy, charged with a terrifying amount of voltage. The security guard dropped his radio. He looked from the smashed barrier to the armored car, and then up at the man standing before him, and he shrank. He physically shrank, his shoulders hunching as his primal brain realized he was in the presence of an apex predator. Declan ignored him. He ignored the entourage. His eyes were locked on me. He walked toward me, stepping out from under the umbrella the assistant offered. He let the rain hit him. He didn't seem to feel it. His gaze swept over my trembling form, taking in the wet, matted hair, the shivering limbs, and finally, the dark, spreading stain of red wine on my chest. He stopped 2 feet away. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. I looked up at him, my teeth chattering. Declan? His face was a mask of terrifying calm, but his eyes were burning. I saw the shift happen in real time. The concern that had been there a moment ago vanished, consumed by a cold, white-hot fury that was all the more frightening because it was so controlled. He looked at the wine stain as if it were a bullet wound. "Who?" he asked. Just one word. His voice was low, but it carried more power than the thunder rolling overhead. "Lara," I whispered. "She threw it." Declan's jaw tightened. A muscle in his cheek jumped once. He didn't look at the guard. He didn't look at the building. He simply reached up and undid the button of his suit jacket. He stripped it off in one fluid motion, exposing his white dress shirt to the downpour. He stepped forward and wrapped the jacket around my shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of sandalwood and ozone. He pulled the lapels together, his large hands gentle as they tucked the fabric under my chin, shielding me from the cold and the shame. "I am sorry I'm late. Celia," he said, his voice softening as he looked into my eyes. He brushed a wet strand of hair from my forehead. "The traffic was difficult, but the game is over now." "Declan, they kicked me out," I sobbed, the relief finally breaking my composure. "The guard, he dragged me." Declan's head snapped toward the guard. The movement was so sharp the guard flinched as if he had been struck. "You put your hands on my wife?" Declan asked. The question was soft, almost conversational, which made it terrifying. She was causing a disturbance, sir," the guard stammered, backing up until he hit the brick wall of the building. "The bride, Mrs. Vance," she said. "Mrs. Vance is not the authority here," Declan said. "I am—" "Declan?" The voice came from the doorway. Lara had stepped out from under the awning, drawn by the commotion. She was squinting into the lights, shielding her eyes with one hand, a fresh cigarette burning in the other. She looked at the smashed gate. She looked at the massive black SUV with the flags. She looked at the team of lawyers and assistants standing at attention. And finally, she looked at the man in the $5,000 suit holding me. Her mouth fell open, The cigarette slipped from her fingers and hissed out on the wet concrete. "Declan?" she repeated, her voice trembling with confusion. "Is that you?" She took a step forward, her eyes darting to the car. "Where is your truck? Whose car is that? Did you steal it?" Declan didn't answer her. He didn't even acknowledge her presence. He turned to the woman with the tablet. "Sarah," Declan said. "Yes, Mr. "Vance," the assistant replied instantly, stepping forward. "Document this," Declan said, gesturing to me, to the wine stain, and to the bruise forming on my arm where the guard had grabbed me. "High resolution. I want the timestamps, and get the security footage from this parking lot before it is deleted. Marcus?" The silver-haired lawyer stepped up. "Already on it. Sir, I have the injunction ready, and I'm filing a preservation order for all surveillance data on the premises. We will have the footage within the hour." "Good," Declan said. Lara stood frozen, her brain unable to process what she was seeing. The carpenter was giving orders to a legal team. The loser was wearing a watch that cost more than her wedding. "What is going on?" Lara shrieked, her voice cracking. "Who are these people? Why are you wearing that suit?" Declan finally turned to her. He looked at her with an expression of profound boredom. "You have a stain on your dress, Lara," he said calmly. Lara looked down frantically. "What? Where?" "Right there." Declan pointed to her sole. "It is permanent." He turned back to me, wrapping his arm securely around my waist. "Come, Celia, we are going inside." "We can't," I whispered, clutching his jacket. "Mom said the guard said—" "The guard works for the venue," Declan said, guiding me toward the main double doors, not the service entrance. "And as of 10 minutes ago, the venue works for me." "What?" "I bought the holding company that owns this estate this morning," Declan said casually, as if he were discussing buying a loaf of bread. "Technically, we are standing on my driveway." He looked at the guard, who was now pale and sweating despite the cold. "Open the door," Declan commanded. The guard didn't hesitate. He scrambled forward, tripping over his own feet, and pulled the heavy door open, bowing his head low. "Yes, sir. Right away. Sir. Sorry, sir." We stepped across the threshold. The transition was jarring. We went from the howling wind and rain into the warm, scented silence of the corridor leading to the ballroom. My heels clicked on the marble floor. Declan's leather soles made a solid, authoritative thud. The two assistants and the lawyer followed close behind us, a phalanx of protection. Lara was still standing outside in the rain, staring at the empty space where we had been. She looked small. She looked confused, and for the first time in her life. She looked irrelevant. "Are you ready?" Declan asked me, pausing before the grand doors of the ballroom. Inside, I could hear the murmur of 300 guests. I could hear the clink of silverware. I could hear Pierce's voice on the microphone, probably making another toast to himself. I looked down at my ruined dress. I looked at the wine stain that Lara had branded me with. "I look like a mess," I said. "No," Declan said, tightening his grip on my waist. "You look like a survivor. And I think it is time we introduced everyone to the architect." He nodded to the assistants. They stepped forward and placed their hands on the brass handles of the double doors. "Open it," Declan said. The doors swung wide. The light from the crystal chandeliers spilled out to meet us, and we stepped into the arena. The heavy double doors of the grand ballroom did not just open. They were thrown wide with a force that sent a gust of cold, storm-charged air rushing into the perfumed warmth of the room. The sound of the heavy oak slamming against the stops echoed like a thunderclap, instantly silencing the string quartet that had been playing a polite rendition of Pachelbel's canon. The chatter of 300 guests died in their throats. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Champagne flutes stopped in midair. I walked in beside my husband. His arm wrapped around my waist like a steel band. I knew what we looked like. I was a disaster. Hair plastered to my skull, makeup running down my face, wearing a dress that looked like it had been used to mop up a crime scene. draped in an oversized men's suit jacket, but Declan looked like the god of vengeance. The water dripping from his hair only made him look sharper, more dangerous. His eyes swept the room, not with the humility of a carpenter entering a palace, but with the arrogance of a landlord inspecting a condemned building. The silence was absolute. You could hear the rain pounding against the windows outside, a rhythmic drumming that underscored the tension in the room. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, were the first to recover. They were seated at the head table, near the stage, and I saw them exchange a look of horrified recognition. My mother stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. She marched toward us, her face a mask of furious indignation, her silver gown rustling aggressively. My father followed close behind, his face purple with rage. "Celia," my mother hissed as she reached us, keeping her voice low so as not to cause a scene, though her eyes were screaming. "Have you lost your mind? Look at you. You are dripping water on the parquet floor. And that stain, my God. You look like a butcher." "Get out," my father growled, stepping up beside her. He glared at Declan, but his eyes didn't quite focus on the suit. He was too blinded by his own prejudice to see what was right in front of him. "And take your husband with you. Who do you think you are? Barging in here like—" My father stopped. He stopped because Declan had turned his head and looked at him. It wasn't a glare. It was a look of such profound, crushing indifference that my father's words died in his throat. "Step aside, Richard," Declan said. It wasn't a request. It was an order given to a subordinate. "Excuse me?" my father sputtered, blinking rapidly. "You do not tell me to step aside in my own—" "I said, step aside," Declan repeated, his voice slightly louder, carrying over the heads of the nearest guests. My mother looked at Declan's suit. I really looked at it. I saw her eyes trace the lapel, the cut of the shoulders, the platinum cufflinks. I saw the confusion dawn on her face. This wasn't the flannel shirt she mocked. This was fabric that cost more than her entire wardrobe. "Declan?" she whispered, unsure. "Where did you get that suit?" Declan ignored her. He didn't even break stride. He guided me forward. Walking straight through the center aisle of the room, the crowd parted instinctively. People pulled their chairs in, shrinking away from the energy radiating off him. Behind us, the sound of heavy footsteps announced the arrival of Marcus Thorne and the security team. My parents turned to see the silver-haired lawyer and the assistants with their tablets. My father gasped. He recognized Marcus. Everyone in the Seattle business world recognized Marcus Thorne. He was the legal pit bull who had dismantled the unions in the dock workers' strike last year. "Thorne?" my father whispered, his face draining of color. "Why is Marcus Thorne here?" We kept walking. My eyes were fixed on the stage. Pierce was standing there, frozen behind the microphone. He had been in the middle of a toast. His hand was still raised in a gesture of triumph, holding a glass of champagne, but his face had gone slack. He was staring at the logo pinned to the lapel of the assistant walking behind Declan, the silver V and the gold Z. Pierce knew that logo. It was stamped on his paychecks. It was etched into the glass doors of the office he was desperate to control. "No," I saw Pierce mouth the word. "No way." As we passed the second row of tables, a chair scraped back. A man stood up. It was Arthur Sterling, the chairman of West Tech Bank, the man Pierce had tried so desperately to impress the night before. The room watched in stunned silence as Arthur Sterling, a man who controlled billions of dollars in assets, stepped out into the aisle. He buttoned his jacket and bowed, his head toward Declan. "Chairman Vance," Sterling said, his voice clear and respectful. "I did not realize you would be attending personally." The name hung in the air like smoke. Vance. A ripple of whispers broke out across the room. "Vance? Did he say Chairman Vance? Wait, isn't that the carpenter? Vance like Vanguard Zenith? That's Declan Vance? The Declan Vance?" My mother grabbed my father's arm. "Richard," she hissed, her voice trembling. "What did Mr. Sterling call him?" My father was staring at Declan's back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He called him chairman. Eleanor is his last name. We never asked. We just thought, oh my God. We reached the base of the stage. Declan stopped. He released my waist gently, turning to me with a look of reassurance. Stay here with Marcus, he said softly. Watch. He turned and walked up the stairs to the stage. Every step was heavy, deliberate, echoing in the silent room. Pierce was trembling now. He looked at Declan, then at the crowd, then at the exit signs. He looked like a rat trapped in a corner. Boss, Pierce stammered into the microphone, his voice amplified and shaking. I mean, Mr. Vance, sir, I didn't know. I thought you were... You thought I was a carpenter, Declan said, his voice not amplified, but clearly audible. He reached out and took the microphone from Pierce's limp hand. Pierce let it go without a fight. He stepped back, nearly knocking over a flower stand, the cheap carnations I hadn't arranged. Declan turned to face the room. He held the microphone with an ease that betrayed years of boardroom dominance. He looked out at the sea of faces, the politicians, the business partners, the family friends who had laughed at his boots and ignored his presence for 5 years. Good evening, Declan said. His voice was deep, smooth, and terrified everyone in the room. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Declan Vance, he announced. I am the founder, majority shareholder, and chairman of the board of Vanguard Zenith. A collective gasp swept through the room. My mother clutched her chest and sat down heavily on an empty chair. My father looked like he was having a stroke. I apologize for the interruption, Declan continued, his tone conversational but deadly. I know you are all here to celebrate a union. However, I am here for a different purpose. I am here to conduct a performance review. He turned slightly to look at Pierce, who was now sweating profusely, his face the color of old paper. Pierce, Declan said into the mic, you told me last night that you planned to purge the dead weight from the company. You spoke about efficiency, about vision. Sir, please, Pierce squeaked, wringing his hands. It was just talk, just locker room talk. I didn't mean... At Vanguard Zenith, we value accuracy, Declan said. Cutting him off, he gestured to Sarah, his assistant, who was standing at the foot of the stage. She handed up a folder. Declan opened the folder. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is the expense report for the current fiscal quarter for the Apex Structures subsidiary, Declan said, holding it up. Specifically, the discretionary spending account assigned to the senior project manager. He looked at the paper, then at the room. It appears, Declan said, his voice hardening, that this wedding, the champagne you are drinking, the food you are eating, the band that stopped playing, was paid for with a corporate credit card. The room erupted. People gasped. Guests looked at their glasses with sudden revulsion. No, Pierce shouted, lunging forward as if to grab the paper, but stopping short when Declan simply looked at him. That is a lie. It is a misunderstanding. I categorized it as client development. Mr. Sterling is here. It is a networking event. $75,000. Declan read from the paper. Categorized as site logistics and client entertainment, you listed the bride as a consultant. Lara, who had finally slunk into the back of the room, let out a small scream. Everyone turned to look at her. I didn't know, Lara yelled from the back, her voice shrill. He told me he got a bonus. He told me he had investors. Silence, Declan commanded. The room obeyed. He turned back to Pierce. You embezzled corporate funds to pay for a party to impress people you don't know, to brag about a job you don't have, to a family you plan to abandon. Abandon? My father shouted, standing up again. What does he mean, abandon? Declan looked at my father. Ask him about the phone call he made last night. Richard, ask him about the cash cow and the 6-month exit strategy. Pierce's knees gave out. He actually fell to the floor, kneeling on the stage in his expensive tuxedo. Please, Mr. Vance, Pierce begged, tears streaming down his face. Please don't do this. I can pay it back. I will work for free. Just don't ruin me. It was Lara. She pressured me. She wanted the big wedding. She said she wouldn't marry me unless it was at Golden Oak. She made me do it. A collective groan of disgust went through the crowd, blaming the bride. It was the final nail in his coffin. Liar! Lara screamed, running down the aisle now, looking like a banshee. You told me you were rich. You told me you were a genius. She is high maintenance, Pierce sobbed into the microphone, which was still in Declan's hand near his face. Look at the budget. Look at the flowers. I had to do it. Declan pulled the microphone away, looking down at the weeping man with pure contempt. You stole my wife's designs, Declan said quietly, but the room heard it. The urban oasis, the vertical grid, you stole them from her sketchbook. I? Pierce couldn't speak. And you stole my money, Declan continued. But worst of all, Pierce, you made my wife sit in the rain. Declan stepped back. He looked at Marcus Thorne. Mr. Thorne, Declan said. You have the paperwork? Yes, Chairman, Marcus said. Stepping onto the stage, he handed Pierce a thick envelope. You are terminated. Effective immediately, Declan announced. For cause, gross misconduct, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. And, Marcus added, his voice dry and professional, we have already contacted the district attorney. Officers are waiting in the lobby to discuss the credit card fraud. It is a felony. Considering the amount, Pierce slumped forward, sobbing into the carpet. Declan turned to the crowd one last time. I am shutting this event down, he said. The property belongs to me now. I suggest you all leave. The show is over. He dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a loud thud that signaled the end of Pierce's life as he knew it. Declan walked down the stairs. He didn't look at my parents. He didn't look at the guests. He walked straight to me, my father. Richard stumbled forward, his face pale. He reached out a trembling hand toward Declan. Declan, my father stammered, his voice weak. Son, we didn't know. Why didn't you say anything? We could have a family. Declan stopped. He looked at my father's hand, then up at his face. Family? Declan asked. Family doesn't make their daughter sit by the garbage bins. Richard, the family doesn't mock a man for the dirt on his hands. We just wanted the best for Lara, my mother cried, wiping her eyes. We didn't mean to exclude you. We were just stressed. Please, Declan, do not do this. Do not humiliate us. I didn't humiliate you, Eleanor, Declan said coldly. You humiliated yourselves. You chased gold so hard, you didn't notice you were standing on a diamond mine. He wrapped his arm around me again. Come, Celia, he said. Let's go home. Wait, Lara screamed, rushing up to us. She grabbed Declan's arm. You can't go. He's going to jail. What about me? The wedding is ruined. I am ruined. Declan looked at her hand on his sleeve. She snatched it back as if she had been burned. You have a degree, Lara, Declan said. I suggest you use it, because the bank of Mom and Dad just lost its liquidity. What? My father asked. Ask your financial advisor who manages your retirement fund, Declan said over his shoulder as we walked away. Vanguard Zenith manages your portfolio. Richard, and I think we are going to have to adjust our risk assessment for clients who associate with known felons. We walked toward the exit. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. I saw the bank chairman, Arthur Sterling, raise his glass to us as we passed. I looked at Declan's profile. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He was just done. And as we stepped out of the ballroom, leaving the chaos, the screaming, and the crying behind us, I realized that the rain had stopped. The silence that followed Declan's declaration was not the silence of peace. It was the vacuum before an implosion. Pierce was still on his knees, his tuxedo trousers soaking up the dust of the stage carpet, a pathetic figure stripped of his arrogance. But Declan was not finished. He was a man who believed in thoroughness, in removing the rot completely so it could not spread. He signaled to Marcus Thorne, the silver-haired legal shark who had been standing silently by the podium like an executioner waiting for the signal. Marcus stepped forward, opening his leather briefcase with a sharp click that echoed in the room. He pulled out a large, rolled-up document and a tablet. "Regarding the termination," Marcus began, his voice dry and devoid of pity, projecting clearly to the stunned audience. "We have grounds beyond the financial embezzlement. We have confirmed multiple counts of intellectual property theft." Pierce lifted his head, his face streaked with tears and snot. "No," he croaked. "That is not true. I have ideas. I am a visionary." "You are a photocopier," Declan said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Marcus tapped the tablet, and the large projection screen behind the stage, which was supposed to be displaying a slideshow of Pierce and Lara's love story, flickered to life. A split-screen image appeared. On the left was a crude, digital rendering labeled Project Urban Oasis, submitted by Pierce Dalton, September 15th. On the right was a scan of a hand-drawn sketchbook page, detailed and intricate, dated August 22nd. The drawings were identical. The hexagonal grid, the hydroponic filtration system, the specific curvature of the solar glass, it was a direct copy. "This," Declan pointed to the screen, "is the proposal Pierce submitted to the board to secure his promotion to vice president. He claimed it came to him in a dream." He turned to look at the crowd, then landed his gaze on my parents. "And this," Declan pointed to the right side of the screen, "is a page from my wife's sketchbook, the one she left on your coffee table. Richard, the night you told her that her career was a waste of time." My father stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He looked from the drawing to me, confusion warring with denial in his eyes. "Celia," he whispered, "you drew that?" "She did not just draw it," Declan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "She engineered it. She calculated the load-bearing capacity of the soil. She designed the water recycling system. Pierce didn't just steal a picture. He stole the mathematical proof that makes the building stand up. If we had built his version, without her underlying calculations that he didn't understand and therefore didn't copy, the structure would have collapsed within 5 years. He wasn't just stealing credit. He was endangering lives." A murmur of horror rippled through the guests. To the business people in the room, this was the ultimate sin. Incompetence they could forgive, negligence they could not. "So," Declan continued, turning back to Pierce, "you are fired not just for theft, but for gross incompetence. You are blacklisted. Pierce, you will never work in construction, architecture, or project management in this state again. I have already sent your file to the licensing board." Pierce let out a sound that was half sob, half wail. He slumped forward, his forehead touching the floor, defeated. But Declan wasn't done. He turned his back on Pierce, dismissing him as if he were already gone, and walked to the edge of the stage. He looked down at my parents, who were standing there like statues, pale and trembling. "You called her a gardener," Declan said to my mother. "You told her she didn't fit the aesthetic. You made her sit by the garbage because you thought she wasn't good enough to stand in this room." He swept his arm out, encompassing the grand ballroom. The soaring vaulted ceilings with their exposed timber beams, the intricate stone masonry of the fireplace, and the panoramic windows that framed the storm outside perfectly. "Look around you, Eleanor," Declan commanded. My mother blinked, looking around nervously as if expecting a trap. "It is a beautiful venue. That is why we chose it. It is prestigious." "Do you know why it is prestigious?" Declan asked. "Do you know why this estate won the Architectural Digest Award for Best Restoration 3 years ago? Do you know why there is a 3-year waiting list to get married here?" "Because of the history," my father stammered. "No," Declan shook his head. "Because of the design, because of the way the landscape flows into the structure, because of the preservation of the original foundation while modernizing the interior." Declan took a step down the stairs, bringing him eye level with my parents. Celia designed this, he said. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. My mother's hand flew to her throat. My father took a stumbling step back. What? Eleanor whispered. That is impossible. This place is the Golden Oak Estate. It was designed by the firm C.M. Horizons. We met the representative. C.M., Declan said slowly. Celia Montrose. She owns the firm. She is the lead architect. She restored this estate. She designed the gardens where you took your photos. She chose the stone for the floor you are standing on. You are standing inside her mind. Eleanor, you are celebrating your golden child in a temple built by the daughter you threw in the trash. I felt a heat rise in my cheeks, not from shame, but from a strange, burning pride. I had never told them. I knew if I had told them I was CM Horizons, they would have found a way to diminish it. They would have said I was just a contractor. So I had let the work speak for itself, and they had loved the work, as long as they didn't know it was mine. No, Lara's voice cut through the silence. She had walked up the aisle, her face a mask of ruined mascara and hatred. That is a lie. She is just a plant lady. She digs in the dirt. She couldn't design this. This place is worth millions. It is worth $42 million, to be exact, Declan corrected her calmly. I should know. I signed the check when my holding company bought it this morning. He looked at Lara, then at my parents. That is the final piece of the puzzle, Declan said. You didn't just insult your daughter. You insulted your landlord. Landlord? My father choked out. I acquired the Golden Oak Hospitality Group at 9 o'clock this morning, Declan said, checking his watch, which means I own this building. I own the chairs you are sitting on. I own the kitchen where the food is being prepared, and I own the security team. He gestured to the back of the room. The large security guard, the one who had dragged me into the rain, the one who had sneered at me, was standing there, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the wall. You, Declan pointed at him. Come here. The guard swallowed hard, his face pale, and walked quickly toward the stage. He didn't look at me. He looked at his boots. Yes, Mr. Vance, the guard mumbled. You were very eager to escort a trespasser out earlier, Declan said. I have a new job for you. There is a man on my stage who is no longer welcome on the premises. He has confessed to felonies. Remove him. The guard looked at Pierce, who was still weeping on the floor. He looked relieved to have a target that wasn't Declan. Yes, sir, the guard said. He hopped onto the stage, grabbed Pierce by the collar of his expensive tuxedo, and hauled him up. Get off me, Pierce screamed, flailing his arms. I am the groom. You can't do this. Lara, do something. Lara stood there, paralyzed. She watched as her husband, the man she had bragged about, the man she had married for status, was dragged down the stairs like a sack of potatoes. Lara, Pierce wailed as he was pulled down the aisle, his heels dragging on the carpet. Tell them about the lake house. Tell them about the plan. His voice faded as the double doors were kicked open and he was thrown out into the rainy night. Exactly where I had been 20 minutes ago. The doors swung shut. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she crumpled toward the floor. It was a graceful, practiced faint, one I had seen her perform whenever a credit card was declined or a social situation became too difficult to navigate. Eleanor, my father shouted, catching her before she hit the ground. She has fainted. Someone get water. My wife has fainted. He looked up at Declan, his eyes full of blame. Look what you have done. You have killed her. Are you happy now? You have destroyed this family. Lara, seeing her cue, threw herself onto her knees beside our mother. She looked up at me, her eyes wild with venom. I hate you, Lara screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. You did this. You planned this. You were jealous because I was happy. So you came here to ruin everything. You are a monster. Celia, you are a bitter, jealous, ugly monster. The guests were whispering frantically now. Some were already grabbing their coats, sensing that the drama had crossed the line from entertaining to liable. I looked at them. I looked at my mother, peeking through her eyelashes to see if anyone was watching. I looked at my father, purple with impotent rage. I looked at Lara, the sister I had sold my car to save, now cursing my name, and for the first time in 32 years, I didn't feel the urge to apologize. I didn't feel the need to fix it. I stepped forward. I moved out from the shelter of Declan's arm. I stood alone in the center of the aisle, illuminated by the chandeliers I had handpicked from a vintage supplier in France. I did not ruin anything, I said. My voice was not loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the hall I had designed, it carried to every corner. Lara stopped screaming. My father stopped shouting. Even my mother stopped her fake shallow breathing for a second. I did not cast Pierce as a thief, I said calmly. He auditioned for that role all by himself. I did not tell him to steal my designs. I did not tell him to embezzle money. And I certainly did not tell him to cheat on you. I looked at Lara. You built your castle on a swamp. Lara, I said. All I did was turn on the lights so you could see the mud. You are just trying to make yourself look better, Lara spat. You think you are so special because you drew some buildings? You are still just the second daughter. You are still nobody. I smiled. It was a genuine smile, cool and detached. I am the architect, I said. And this, I gestured to the room, is my house. You are just guests who overstayed your welcome. I looked down at my dress, the cream silk that was now stained deep crimson. And Lara, I added, my voice hardening just a fraction. Regarding this dress, you called me clumsy. You said I was a mess. I brushed the fabric with my hand. This is raw, hand-woven silk from a cooperative in Kyoto. I commissioned the fabric myself. It is one of a kind. The weaving process takes 4 months. Lara glared at me. Who cares about your stupid dress? You should, I said. Because since you destroyed it intentionally, and we have that on camera, you are liable for the replacement cost. My lawyer will be sending the invoice to you personally, not to Pierce. Since you are so fond of status, you can pay the status price. You wouldn't? Lara stammered. Marcus, I said, turning to the lawyer, add the dress to the civil suit for assault and battery. Consider it done, Mrs. Vance, Marcus said smoothly. I turned back to Declan. He was watching me with a look of pure adoration. He held out his hand. Shall we? He asked. Yes, I said. I think I have had enough of this party. I took his hand. We turned and walked toward the exit. Celia, my father shouted after us. If you walk out that door, do not bother coming back. You hear me? You are dead to us. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I was dead to you the moment I didn't turn out to be Lara, I said to the air ahead of me. I am just making it official. We reached the doors. The guests parted, staring at us with a mixture of fear and awe. We walked past the table where the bank chairman, Arthur Sterling, was standing. He nodded to me. Beautiful architecture. Mrs. Vance, he said quietly. Thank you. Mr. Sterling, I replied. We stepped out into the lobby, and then out into the night. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and clean. The rain had washed the pavement clean. Behind us, inside the Golden Oak estate, I could hear the sounds of shouting, the sounds of a family tearing itself apart now that the scapegoat was gone. But it sounded distant, like a radio playing in another room. I climbed into the passenger seat of the black SUV. Declan got in the driver's side. He didn't start the car immediately. He turned to me, reaching out to touch my cheek. Are you okay? He asked. I looked at the estate one last time, glowing on the hill, my creation, my prison, and now, just a building. I lost my family tonight, I whispered. No, Declan said firmly. He took my hand and placed it on his chest, right over his heart. You didn't lose anything that was real, and you have me. You have always had me. I leaned back against the leather seat. Closing my eyes, I felt lighter. The crushing weight of 30 years of expectations had been lifted. Let's go home, I said. I have a new project I want to start. Declan smiled. Starting the engine, the powerful purr of the motor filled the silence. What is the project? He asked as we pulled away, leaving the shattered gate behind us. Me, I said. I am going to rebuild myself. We drove into the night, and for the first time, I didn't look back. It had been exactly 7 days since the wedding. The storm that had battered Seattle that night had washed away more than just the dust on the streets. It had scrubbed the veneer off my entire life. For 32 years. I had lived in a house of mirrors, distorting myself to fit the reflections my family wanted to see. Now, the glass was broken, and for the first time, I was seeing things with crystal clarity. I stood on the balcony of our home, looking down the winding driveway that snaked up the cliffside. This house, our real house, was a sharp contrast to the faux Tudor heaviness of the Golden Oak estate. We called it the Glass Prism. It was a cantilevered masterpiece of steel and glass that I had designed 3 years ago, suspended over the Puget Sound like a bird in flight. It was modern, unapologetic, and fiercely private. It was invisible from the road, hidden by a dense forest of Douglas firs that I had personally curated, to the outside world. Declan and I lived in a modest ranch house in the suburbs. That was the decoy address we gave to my parents. This place? This was our sanctuary. And today, the gatekeepers of my past had finally found the courage, or the desperation, to ring the bell. I watched through the high-powered binoculars as my father's sedan pulled up to the main security gate at the bottom of the hill. It was a humiliating come-down from the limousines they were used to. The car looked small and insignificant against the 12-foot steel gates that guarded our property. I saw my father, Richard, step out. He looked older than he had a week ago. His posture, usually so rigid with self-importance, was slumped. My mother, Eleanor, stayed in the passenger seat, clutching her purse like a shield, and in the back, I could see Lara. She wasn't wearing designer sunglasses today. She was staring out the window, looking hollow. They pressed the intercom button. I didn't answer. I had disconnected the feed to the house speakers an hour ago. Instead, I watched as our estate manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, who possessed the demeanor of a retired MI6 agent, walked down the driveway to meet them. He didn't open the gate. He spoke to them through the bars. I couldn't hear the words from up here, but I knew the script. Declan and I had written it together over coffee this morning. Mr. Henderson handed a thick manila envelope to my father through the bars. I saw my father hesitate, then take it. He opened it right there on the roadside. I knew exactly what was inside. The first document was a formal notification of a lawsuit against Pierce Dalton for corporate embezzlement, fraud, and theft of intellectual property. The forensic accountants had finished their audit on Tuesday. Pierce hadn't just stolen $75,000 for the wedding. He had funneled nearly $200,000 over the last 2 years into offshore gambling accounts. He was looking at a minimum of 10 years in federal prison. The second document was for Lara. It was a civil suit for assault and battery, citing the incident with the wine glass, backed by high-definition security footage that clearly showed her malicious intent. There was also a defamation suit attached for the lies she had spread about my professional reputation to our mutual acquaintances. We weren't asking for money we needed. We were asking for an amount that would force her to acknowledge the cost of her cruelty. But the third document, that was the one that would hurt the most. It was a letter from the Vanguard Zenith Charitable Trust. For 5 years, my parents had enjoyed a lifestyle that far exceeded their actual income. They took European cruises, bought new cars, and renovated their kitchen. They believed they were astute investors. They believed their retirement fund was performing miracles. The truth was, Declan had been quietly topping up their accounts every month. He had been paying their property taxes anonymously. He had covered the insurance premiums on their house. He had done it because he loved me, and he knew that their financial stress would eventually bleed over onto me. The letter in my father's hands informed them that the anonymous donor program had been terminated effective immediately. It laid out the cold, hard numbers. Without Declan's subsidy, they were not wealthy socialites. They were barely middle class, living in a house they could no longer afford, with a retirement fund that would run dry in 18 months. I saw my father stagger back as he read the letter. He grabbed the iron bars of the gate for support. He turned and said something to my mother. I saw her hand go to her mouth. She didn't faint this time. The reality was too stark for theatrics. Then, there was a commotion behind their car. A taxi pulled up, and Pierce jumped out. He looked like a wreck, unshaven, wearing rumpled clothes. Desperate. He ran toward the gate, waving his arms. Lara got out of the car. I expected them to embrace. I expected them to cling to each other in their shared misery. Instead, they collided in a whirlwind of screaming accusations. Even from this distance, I could see the body language. Pierce was blaming Lara for his downfall, screaming that her demands for the expensive wedding had forced him to embezzle. Lara was screaming back, shoving his chest, likely blaming him for humiliating her and ruining her social standing. It was a grotesque ballet of narcissism. Their love, which they had paraded on Instagram as a fairy tale, evaporated the moment the money ran out. It was a transaction that had gone bankrupt. Mr. Henderson said one final thing to them, pointedly turned his back, and walked away up the driveway. My father looked up toward the hill, toward the house he couldn't see but knew was there. He stood there for a long time. I wondered if he was remembering the time he wouldn't let Declan sit on the sofa. I wondered if he realized that the dust on Declan's boots was the very earth he was now standing on, begging for entry. They got back into their cars. The caravan of regret turned around and drove away, disappearing down the road. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel a thrill of revenge. I just felt a quiet, heavy door clicking shut in my mind. The draft was gone. The house was warm. Are they gone? I turned. Declan was standing in the doorway of the balcony, holding 2 mugs of tea. He was wearing a soft cashmere sweater and jeans. No suit, no armor. Just my husband. Yes, I said, taking the mug he offered. They are gone. Did they read the papers? They did, I replied, looking out at the gray waters of the Sound. Pierce and Lara were fighting in the street. I think the divorce will happen before the criminal trial. Declan nodded, leaning against the railing beside me. It is inevitable. Parasites turn on each other when the host stops feeding them. We stood in silence for a while, watching a ferry cut through the water in the distance. The air was crisp, smelling of pine needles and salt. Come, Declan said softly. I want to show you something. He led me through the house, past the living room with its panoramic views, past my studio where my drafting table sat waiting, and out the back door. We walked along a stone path lined with Japanese maples until we reached the structure that was the heart of our home. The greenhouse. It wasn't a simple glass shed. It was a cathedral of botany, a climate-controlled biosphere that I had designed to house the rarest collection of tropical flora in the Pacific Northwest. It was 30 feet tall, with automated misting systems and soil sensors that I had programmed myself. We stepped inside. The air was warm and humid, rich with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, cold atmosphere of my parents' home. Here, everything was alive. Everything was growing. In the center of the greenhouse, on a large teak workbench, lay a large sheet of drafting paper. I walked over to it. It was a sketch I had started this morning. It wasn't a building. It wasn't a landscape. It was a design for a community park in the inner city. A project I had wanted to do for years but never had the time for because I was too busy fixing Lara's mistakes. It is beautiful, Declan said, looking at the charcoal lines. The way you integrated the water features with the playground is brilliant. I am going to submit it to the city council next week, I said, tracing the line of a walkway with my finger. Under my own name, Celia Vance, lead architect. Celia Vance, Declan repeated, tasting the name. I like the sound of that. He walked around the table and stood opposite me. He reached out and picked up a pair of pruning shears that were lying on the bench. He turned them over in his hands, looking thoughtful. You know, he said quietly, your father called my office this morning, before they came here. I looked up. He did? Yes. He tried to get through to me. When the secretary blocked him, he left a voicemail. He was crying. Celia. He said he was sorry. He said they were just blinded by ambition. But they love us. He asked if there was any way we could reconsider, not the money, but the family. He asked for forgiveness. Declan looked at me, his eyes searching mine. I didn't answer him. Declan continued. Because it is not my call. It is yours. They are your blood. If you want to open the gate, if you want to let them back in, I will support you. I can stop the lawsuits. I can turn the funds back on. I can make this all go away. He paused, setting the shears down. Do you want to forgive them, Celia? I looked at the shears. I looked at the lush, vibrant monstera plant growing behind Declan. It was huge, its leaves glossy and green. But just last week, it had been struggling. It had yellowing leaves, sucked dry by aphids. I had spent hours painstakingly cutting away the dying parts, removing the pests, giving the healthy roots room to breathe. I thought about my mother's face when she told me I didn't fit the aesthetic. I thought about my father's voice when he called my husband a servant. I thought about Lara, standing in the rain, throwing wine on me because she needed an ashtray. Forgiveness is a noble concept, but forgiveness without change is just permission to be hurt again. And they hadn't changed. They were only sorry because the consequences had finally arrived. I picked up the charcoal pencil. I looked at my drawing, a vision of a future that was clean, honest, and entirely mine. You know, Declan, I said softly, my voice steady. I learned a long time ago in horticulture that you cannot save a tree that is rotten to the core if you leave the dead branches. They don't just look ugly. They spread disease. They steal the nutrients from the healthy parts. They block the light. I looked up at him and smiled. It wasn't a sad smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally put down a heavy load after walking 1,000 miles. A plant wants to grow, I said, but to grow tall. To really flourish, you have to be willing to prune the dead weight. You have to cut it off, completely. Declan watched me, a look of profound respect dawning on his face. He understood. So the gate stays closed? He asked. The gate stays closed, I confirmed. They have their lives, and I have mine. I wish them no harm. I just wish them away. Pruning the dead branches, Declan nodded. I like that philosophy. He walked around the table and kissed my forehead. I am proud of you. Architect. I am proud of us, I replied. He pulled back and looked at the drawing again. So, what is the first step for this park project? Do we need investors? No, I laughed. We have the capital. I just need a good contractor, someone who knows how to work with their hands, someone who isn't afraid of a little dirt. Declan grinned. The boyish, mischievous grin that I had fallen in love with in a salvage yard 5 years ago. I might know a guy, he said, but he is pretty expensive. He charges in kisses. I think I can afford his rates, I said. We stood there in the warmth of the greenhouse, surrounded by the life we had built with our own hands. Outside, the world was chaotic. Pierce was facing prison. Lara was facing bankruptcy. My parents were facing the reality of their own mediocrity. But inside, it was quiet. Inside, there was only growth. I looked down at my hand. The charcoal dust on my fingers looked like soot. But it felt like creation. I wasn't the second daughter anymore. I wasn't the ghost architect. I wasn't the woman sitting in the rain. I was Celia Vance, and I was finally blooming. I reached out and turned the page of the sketchbook, covering the old drawing with a fresh blank sheet of white paper. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was empty, waiting for me to fill it with whatever I wanted. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the oxygen-rich air. I looked at the door of the greenhouse, leading out to the garden. Ready? Declan asked. Ready, I said. I didn't look back at the closed gate down the hill. I turned my back on the shadow of the past, picked up my pencil, and stepped forward into the light. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below sharing your location and your thoughts on Celia's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Blue Payback, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.